Good morning, everyone. Good morning. We are going to continue our adventure through the book of Rus. Fascinating sefer, as we spoke about last week, and we'll begin with one passage from Rus Rabbah, from the Medrash, which will help us with a review of everything we learned last week. Okay, so the Medrash in Rus Rabbah, in source A that you see in front of you, Amar Rav Ze'era says, "HaMegillah Hazos, this book, this scroll, Ein ba lo tuma v'lo tahara, lo iser v'lo heter." It doesn't have any laws of purity and impurity. It doesn't have any laws of what is permitted and forbidden. In other words, different books in the Torah teach us different things. So this book, the book of Rus, does not teach us laws as we know it. Rather, what is it there for? It is written to show you literally the great reward for those who do kindness. But what I'm going to pull out of here is that what Rav Ze'era is teaching us is that the function of this book is to teach us about kindness. Kindness seems like a very straightforward thing, right? Be kind. Everyone, who could disagree? But as we spoke about last week, that's not entirely true. We spoke about the fact, we quoted Rashi, who says that the word chesed actually is associated with the term of busha, of cherpa, of embarrassment, of shame. Because every time that you give, you also in some way take away, because you make someone a receiver, and that diminishes them, or it could diminish them. And this was the challenge that we spoke about the people of Sodom grappled with, and they came to their resolution, which was, Ma shali shali, v'shalcha shalcha. I have what is mine, what is yours, Zu midas Sodom. This is the attribute of the people of Sodom, which means they weren't necessarily just terribly selfish people. Where it was coming from was a philosophy which in more modern terms has come to be known as like rugged individualism, the sense that we have to be self-made. And if I give to you, if the government gives to you, if someone else gives to you, then you're actually hurting them. The people of Sodom said, we will not allow poor people to come by, not because we don't like them, because we love them, because we want them to build themselves up. Now again, that was a terribly immoral thing. God flips the city on its head. But ultimately, what they were grappling with was a very deep and important question, a question which really goes all the way back to the moon, right? We spoke about the Medrash, right? If you recall last week, we spoke about the Medrash where the sun and the moon, they argue, and we said, of course, you cannot take a Medrash like that literally, but what it speaks to is the fact that the sun gives light to the moon is the recipient, and therefore feels smaller, and that is embedded into nature. And God says, yeah, you're right. There's something a little bit broken over here. It doesn't mean that we can't function with it. It doesn't mean we are stuck. It means we have to figure out how to deal with this brokenness, that when someone receives, they get diminished. And this is something which, although Sodom was destroyed, there were people who survived, and those were the people of Lot. That was Lot and his daughters. And we have two nations, Moab, Ammon and Moab, and Rus, of course, comes from the nation of Moab. It's a nation of stolz, as they say in Yiddish. It has a sense of, a sense of self, a sense of I am someone important. And we saw that some of that gets expressed towards the end of the second parak, the second chapter, where we saw Rus when Nami saw her and said, who did this for you? What did Rus say? She said, who did this for me? I did for Boaz. She said, Boaz didn't do for me. I did for Boaz. That was the play on words over there. And what the Medrash over there pointed out, Rabbi Yeshua, I think the Medrash and Chuma says that, Medrash Rabbah, says that what you learn from here is that when someone gives and someone receives, we normally think the giver is the greater one, but without a recipient, the giver has no one to give to. And therefore, if anything, the recipient is the one who's giving to the giver. And this was expressed in Rus's sense of self, right? There's this beautiful sense of self. She's not losing herself. She has a very strong sense of self and recognizes that when she receives, she's actually helping the person who is giving. Now, that is not the resolution entirely for chesed. We're not done yet. We found two other important things that took place. One other thing which we'll highlight, The other thing which we'll highlight is that when Boaz greets his people, what does he say? Yivarechecha Hashem. And the Gemara tells us, there are source sheets on the bima if you'd like. There are source sheets over there. And what is happening over there? The Gemara tells us is Eis lasos lashem heferus orasecha, that Boaz instituted something which was radical. To say "May God be with you" was actually an affront to the honor, the dignity that we give to Hashem. We normally are very, very reticent to use God's name in any way that can be seen as in vain. And when he said Yivarech Hashem, he was actually instituting something. He recognized that people did not respect one another. Remember, it was an immoral society. It was a society embodied by Elimelech, who says, I don't want to share with other people. He runs away. It was a society that didn't care about anyone else. And Boaz himself grappled with this challenge, and he recognized that things were not good. And so he had to introduce this really radical institution where he goes ahead and he says, may God be with you, recognizing the divine, the godliness that exists within each person. Okay, so we're going to start pulling these pieces together and start to see how Rus and Nami resolve the issue, the challenge of Chesed. Okay, so with that, let's begin. We're going to begin the third chapter of the book of Rus. So let's begin. So Vatomer la Nami, pasuk number 1. Vatomer la Nami chamosa, and Nami, her mother-in-law, said to her, Biti, my daughter, hello avakesh lach manoach asher yitav lach. My daughter, do I not seek resting for you, or they translate over here as a home for you, that it may be well with you. In other words, Nami says, don't you know I have your best interest in mind? And when someone says that to you, what do you normally do? You get nervous, right? If someone says they have your best interest in mind, be scared, right? But obviously, she's leading to something which may not be so straightforward. There are source sheets over there, right? Something that may not be so straightforward. If someone says that they have your best interest, you have to wonder, why do they have to say that to you? If you give me $1 million, I'll be like, okay, right? But if I'm about to give you a patch and I say I have your best interest in mind, oh, now I get it. So let's listen closely to what Nami is going to tell Rus. Va'ata, and now, halo Boaz modatenu asher yis es na'arosav. Boaz, who is our relative, and you were with his women, he was, again, Rus spent her time with the maidservants of Boaz. He is winnowing the barley tonight in the threshing floor. Now this is very odd. Why would Boaz, who is Boaz? Boaz, if you recall, we spoke about last week, Boaz was actually one of the judges of Israel. Okay, the most significant person. He also happened to be fabulously wealthy. Okay, so let's put in modern terms, I don't know, it's like Ramosha Feinstein and what's his name, Reichman, like merged into one, okay, for the 20th century, right, merged into one person. Now, he owns a big barley field, right, and it's the night for the barley to be, for it to be threshed. What do you expect him to be? Home sleeping, drinking a cup of tea, drinking some gin and rum. What's he doing? And he says, no, he's sleeping on the threshing floor. Why in the world would Boaz, this great, grand, wealthy, prestigious individual, be sitting there on the threshing floor? So says the Medrash Agada in source B, Hinehu Nasi Shaldor, he was the prince, the leader of the generation, Vuzora Begora, and he was winnowing in the granary. El Sheadar Parutz Ba'arayos. He knew that it was a generation that was rather immoral. V'hu yotze lishmars grono, and therefore he went to chaperone his workers who were in the granary. Sometimes when people, sailors are not known to be the most scrupulous people. Why? So, it's not just because they live on the edge of whatever, but they're traveling and they're away from people who know them, right? When you're away from the city, no one's watching. You do whatever you want. Okay, so when the workers were out there from day to night and they would sleep in the granary, sometimes not such great things would happen out there, right? And so in order to ensure that nothing bad happens, he felt the need to actually be there as a form of a chaperone. So everyone's sleeping there. He, of course, has his own place, but he was basically there. But what this tells us immediately is the fact that it is, again, speaks to the depravity of the generation, that this guy has to go ahead, that the Boaz, the shofet, the judge, and the individual has to go and watch his people. So let's see what happens. So says Nami, okay? V'rachatzt, and you shall wash yourself. V'sacht, and anoint yourself. V'samtzim losayich alayich, and place your dress upon yourself. V'yarad hagoren, and go down to the granary. Al tivadi leish, don't let anyone know you're there. Ad kaloso lechol v'lishtos, until Boaz has finished eating and drinking. Okay? She says, go dress up and go down there. Okay? Now, let's keep on reading. Let's just go to verse 4. Don't worry about that source we're skipping now. When he lies down, and you will know, and you will know the place that he is lying there. Uvas vigilis margelosav, go there and uncover his feet. V'shachavt, and lie down. V'uyagilach es asher ta'asin, and he will tell you what to do. Okay? One more pasuk, and then we'll unpack this a little bit. Vatomer eleha. Okay, and she said to and Rus said to Nami, "Kol asher tomri elai haseh, whatever you say to me, I will do." Now, if you're following closely, you'll notice, only in the Hebrew, not in the English, excuse me for that, and that is that there's a whole bunch of things in brackets and parentheses over here. These past few verses have been a little funny. They weren't just, sometimes what that reflects the fact that if you were to open a Torah scroll, sometimes there are words that are written in one way, but are read in a different way. We call kri and ksiv. Okay, we have a tradition to read it in one way, but it's written in a different way. So if you actually go back to verse 3 and you were to read it without our tradition, okay, and it would say v'yaradti in the parentheses. V'yaradti means I will go down to the granary, not you will go down to the granary. Not me saying I will go down. And then look at the next verse. It says, and you shall lie down. It doesn't, if it's, vishachaft is the way we read it, that's our tradition. But in the text, if you were to open a scroll, it would say, vishachavti, I will lie down, right? So what's happening over here? This is, in many ways, Nami. Remember, Nami started this whole conversation saying, I know this is not necessarily your best interest, but trust me, I have your best interest in mind. Meaning, obviously, there is a certain, something lacking over here. Yes, Boaz is very wealthy. True. And very powerful. True. But Boaz is a very old man. According to many commentators, he dies not too long after this episode happens, okay? He's quite an elderly man, okay? And Rus is a young, beautiful woman who has, as we'll see soon, a lot of prospects. People want to marry her. And people who are wealthy, people can take care of her, right? So yes, marriage back then was far more transactional than it is today, but she had many options. And Nami's telling her, I want you to try to connect to Boaz, right? It's not something which is necessarily so easy for her to do, right? You can imagine it being quite hard for her to do. What is the ultimate goal over here? What does Nami want? Nami had a husband. She had 2 sons. What happened to them? They all died. She wants continuity from her family. The problem is there is no family left. All of her blood relatives, all of her descendants have deceased, and she is too old to have children. So what does she do? She says, Rus, I want you to be my proxy. I want you to act for me. Because if you really, as you connected yourself to our family, my family needs continuity. And although I don't have any children, I want you to do this on my behalf as a way of ensuring that our family line, even though Rus is not her daughter, she's her former daughter-in-law, this would be a way of continuing our family line to some degree. Now, where do you see that most clearly? What in the last verse, in verse 5, it says, Vatomer Eleha, and Rus said to her, Kol Hashatomri, and there's a word missing. It doesn't say Kol Hashatomri Elai Aseh. Kol Hashatomri, whatever you say, do, or I will do. But the word Elai, what does Elai mean? To me. That word is missing. The word me is missing from this verse. In other words, Rus recognizes that to go ahead and take on this mission, she is negating her own needs over here. She is ignoring her Elai, her to me, disappears, right? She is basically acting as a proxy entirely for her former mother-in-law. You all still with me? In other words, so what's happening over here is we're getting a much more complex picture of Rus. Last week, we saw Rus who said, he didn't help me, I helped him. She's a strong woman. She says, you were helping me, I'm helping you. But over here we say at the same time, she's able to negate herself. She's able to also silence her ego, silence her needs, and say, I'm going to do something entirely for someone else. This is not just a strong-willed person who bulldozes everyone in front of them. This is an individual who is far more complex, right? You see, those two things are not, you would not necessarily put those two things together. But we're learning a lot about Rus. Let's go a little bit further. Vaterda Goren. She goes down to the granary, to the threshing floor. She does everything that her mother-in-law told her to do. Vayocha Boaz vayesh, and Boaz eats and he drinks. Vayitav libo, and his heart is merry. He's feeling good. Okay, vayavo lishka b'ktei rama, and he goes to lie down at the edge of the heap of corn, or of the grain that they harvested. Vatova balat. She comes quietly. Vatigal markalosav vatishkav, and she reveals his feet, and she lies down. Let me ask you a question. I think we're all somewhat familiar with the story. Many of us are familiar with the story. How do you always understand this passage? Again, Rus over here is sent by Nami to Boaz, middle of the night. Imagine, Boaz is sleeping in his house, in his place. She breaks in, okay, uncovers his feet, and lies down. What is Rus trying to do? Sorry? Okay, good. So there's something called yibum. We'll come back to that. Yeah, what was that? Seduce him. There's some level of seduction over here. Okay. Marry him. Okay, good. Okay, all those things are true. It's a pretty intense way of doing this, don't you think? In other words, here, guy, why don't I give you an alternative, okay? A lot less dramatic text. Boaz gets a knock on his door on Sunday morning, and Rus is standing there, and she's dressed beautifully, and she says, hey, Boaz, I really like you. What do you think about Yibum? How's that for a story, right? I mean, that would be a lot more straightforward. This is insane. I mean, this is literally insane for her to go in middle of the night to the most prestigious person in the world, uncover his feet, and sit there and lie down and wait for things to happen. It's crazy. It is an absolutely crazy thing to do. Why go to this extent, right? It's certainly more than just knocking on the door. You with me? It's a little strange. So there are different approaches, and certainly part of it is seduction, but keep in mind, Boaz, as he's going to articulate in a moment, is quite an elderly person. He is, again, not going to live too much longer in this story. Rus, young, vivacious, life in front of her, completely great. There is generally speaking, if someone were to come to me and one person was 85, and a man is 85, and he comes, he says, I want you to meet my bride. And he brings this 32-year-old woman over. I'd say, she seems very nice, and you're very nice, but no. Like, it's not happening. Like, what are you doing, right? It's not going to be a healthy relationship. Yeah, 10-year gap, 15-year gap, whatever, we can talk about that. But an 82-year-old and a 23-year-old or a 32-year-old, it's not going to happen. It's not going to happen, right? And there's actually a law in the laws of Yibum, which we'll talk about soon, where the Torah tells us that you're supposed to, the rabbis are supposed to encourage people, if there's this huge age gap, don't do it. It's a bad idea. So but you are able to do it if it is clear that they really like each other. They're able, sometimes you can get past those differences. Sometimes you say, wow, we're so different, it's not going to work. And so you say, Afa Pikain, even though we're going to work this out. We're going to work this out. And you can speak to many couples who, despite being very different, they said, we'll work it out. Rus over here, it's not enough for her to knock on the door and say, hi, I'd really like to marry you. That doesn't convey that she really wants this to happen. So she has to go ahead, and in some ways, how do you develop a relationship? What ultimately helps a relationship develop, strengthen, is when a party, first usually one person does, the other person does a response, makes himself vulnerable to the other. For Rus to knock on the door in the morning and say, I'd like to marry you, okay, big deal. And he could say, I'm busy, whatever. No, but it doesn't really, she doesn't bear herself. By her coming there, by her seducing him, right? It's not just what she's doing to him, what she's doing to herself, right? We sometimes lose sight of the fact that she is making herself vulnerable in this moment and saying, I really want you, right? She is taking the first step in the deepening of a relationship, which is the emotional, unclothing. There is a sense of, I'm not going to my normal guards that we all have in front of one another. I'm going to remove that and make myself vulnerable, show you my needs, show you my wants. And that's what she's doing in this moment, right? It's much more than just a knock on the door. She is trying to develop a deeper relationship over here. And of course, what happens when one party goes ahead and makes themselves vulnerable? What is the other party supposed to do? They're supposed to do the same in kind. They need to make themselves, one party goes ahead and makes themselves vulnerable. Another says, okay, cool. Right? Then what happens? Not only does it not work, but you end up taking 25 steps back. Right? We need to be reciprocated, right? If it's not reciprocated, then something's going to be lost. So with that in mind, let's watch how the next passages play out. Yes, you had a question?
Is that minimizing yourself by doing that?
I hear you. Obviously, Nami did not feel so. Obviously, Nami did not feel so. Yeah. Okay, so let's see what happens. So, and it was at midnight. The man was scared. And a woman was lying by his legs. He wakes up in the middle of the night and he says, oh my gosh, someone's here. Verse 9, Vayomer mi'at, and he says, who are you? Vatomer, and she says, Anochi Rus amasecha, I am Rus, your maidservant. Ufarasta knafecha amascha kigolata, spread your cloak over me because I am your relative. Okay, so there is a concept which we'll talk about more in a moment, something called yibum. Okay, let's actually talk about it right now, because just to make sure we're all on the same page. There's a concept in the Torah called yibum, which is when there are two brothers, one of them is married, right, and he dies before without having any children. Okay, so the law, interesting law, is that brother number two has to go ahead and has a choice, either to marry this woman, or they go through a process known as chalitza, where basically they say, we're not interested in one another, okay? But there is some natural connection when two brothers, and the idea is continuity. Again, which is really what's happening over here, right? That's what Nami wants. She wants continuity. That is called yibum, where you basically, again, two brothers, one of them dies without children, that means there's no progeny. There's no continuity. So in order to ensure that there's continuity, the concept of yibum is that brother number two has the opportunity to marry her unless he or she say, we're not interested.
Is he Elimelech's brother?
Sorry?
Is he Elimelech's brother?
He is not Elimelech's brother. So Yibum, good. Okay, so good. The question that's being asked is, wait a second. Yibum normally means that it's usually, the biblical example of Yibum is two brothers. But the truth is, it is a broader concept. And you already find that in the times of Yehuda and Tamar, where it's not necessarily, yes, the halacha is about two brothers, but there's a broader concept, which is that we had tried to ensure someone in the family is able to ensure that continuity. So yes, halachically, this is not the classic yibum. Rus's husband died, the other brother died. It's over. Nami, and Nami and Boaz is not Elimelech's brother. The point is, it's something broader. Again, it's like an extension of the concept of yibum. Okay, so let's see what happens. So he says to her. Where are we? Verse 10. Pasuk Yud. V'yomer brucha at Lashem. You are blessed to God. Biti, my daughter. Heitav chastecha acharom min harishon. This kindness, what you're doing now, he recognizes what she's doing, that it's being done for noble reasons. This is greater than your first kindness of coming along with Nami back to the land of Israel. Levilti lechas acharei abachurim imdal v'masher. The fact that you could have went to any young man, old or young, and you chose to come along. Wow. That's big. You came and you went along with. You came to me. That's a big deal. Vata now, BT, my daughter. Altiri, don't worry. Kol asher tomri esalach. Whatever you say, I will do. Ki yodea kol shar imi ki eshes chayalat. Everyone knows that you are a virtuous woman. This is the word eshes chayil first appears in the Torah. We know that generations later, King Solomon, Shlomo HaMelech, writes a song that many people sing on Friday nights called eshes chayil. But this is the very first time she is a person of strength, and we know from her she is a person of strength, right? We know her strength because she said, "Oh, he gave to me." But strength, sometimes we normally make a mistake to think that strength is only when we assert ourselves. Greater strength in the Torah, right, is Ezehu Gibor, who is strong, according to Pirkei Avot, Hakoveshes Yitro. Someone who's able to hold back from their desires. In Judaism, strength is not defined. The greatest form of strength is not when we push ourselves out. It's when we bite our tongue, when we hold ourselves back, when we look the other way, when we don't, when we restrain our needs. That is in many ways an even greater strength. Okay? You are a woman of strength. V'ata now, ki amnam ki gol anochi. It's true. I am a relative of yours. V'gam yesh gol karav mimeni. However, there is someone else who is a closer relative, and therefore, he says, we're going to have to figure things out tomorrow with this other relative. Now, let's pause over here before we see the next verse, okay? It's midnight, okay? This beautiful woman has shown up in the threshing floor. The reason that Boaz is there is to protect people from doing anything questionable, okay? This beautiful woman is there, lying down next to him, and they have this wonderful dialogue. What would you do, if you were Boaz at this point, what would you now tell her? Go home, right? You do not belong here. Thank you, I get it, you don't want to knock on my door, I get it, okay, but now it's time to leave, because this is putting me in a very vulnerable situation, right? In other words, Boaz over here, not only is it vulnerable in the sense that he could be seen, but the Gemara, the Medrash tells us, if you look at source E, the Medrash tells us in Rus Rabbah, Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Kol Osa Halayla, that entire night, Haya Yitzro Mekatergo, his evil inclination raged within him, Va'amar, and said, At Panui Mavakesh Isha, you are single and are looking to get married, Vihi Panuya Mavakesh Isha, she's single, she's looking for a husband, Amoda Bo'ala, be intimate with her. And she should be for you a wife. And he swears to his inclination, no, I will not touch her. Okay? So he's being attacked on, so to speak, both sides. He has his dignity, because people may see the fact they're going to come in the morning and be like, oh, hi, who's that? Right? Obviously, that would be terrible. And in addition, he is trying to do the right thing. He's a moral, ethical, he's a judge of Israel. He's a righteous person. He doesn't want to go ahead and act on his impulses, on his drives. And so he's grappling with this. So the normal thing would be to say, go home, go back to your mother-in-law. And what does he say? Look at verse 13. Lini halayla, stay for the night. Okay, now again, there is nothing in the text. Some people say, oh, they must have been intimate. The Torah is not shy. Okay, when people do things, intimacy is not something which the Torah is not PG-13, it's R-rated throughout. Okay, the Torah always will say when things happen, it does. So she literally just slept there for the night while he's, of course, in his mind thinking, oh my gosh, I hope someone doesn't see me. And at the same time, trying to overcome his natural drives, okay? He says, stay the night. And in the morning, fine, let's skip the rest of the pasuk. Basically, he says, stay for the night. Why is he doing this? Why does he not just say, go home? Thoughts? You're like, he's crazy. What's going on? Right? So let's think about this. She just made herself vulnerable to him. She just bared her soul, saying, I know that you're old. I'm attracted to you. I want to be married to you. I really would like to get married to you. And she went ahead and did so in a very soul-bearing and an emotional way, a way of saying, like, this is a very, like you said, it could be degrading. Well, whenever you bare yourself, that you could call that degrading, call that bearing yourself, right? It's always a challenge. Whenever we share of ourselves, is that embarrassing, or is that, depends on the context? Over here in this context, it's not really degrading. She's doing it in hopefully a loving context, and she makes herself vulnerable. Now imagine if you were to say, thank you so much, see you tomorrow, right? It deflates you, right? I go ahead and I make myself vulnerable to you, and you're like, cool, right? That completely deflates. So what does he have to do? He has to go ahead and show respect back to her, to make himself vulnerable in order to follow in that dance of what a relationship looks like. When one party makes himself vulnerable and the other party does not reciprocate, it is the most deflating thing in the world. And Boaz over here, the man who reintroduces the notion of every person being divinely, connected. Yevarechecha Hashem, he says, I'm not going to send her home. First of all, it's dangerous, right? This woman by herself and a group of people, right? He knows that people are, that men are out, right? So it's dangerous to her, right? And it's disrespectful to her. So as a sign of respect, a way of making himself vulnerable, what he's doing is he's building a strong relationship with her by reciprocating her vulnerability with his vulnerability. He's putting himself in a difficult position, and in doing so, he's respecting her, and in doing so, really establishing a relationship. With me? So that, I think, is the deeper sense of what's going on in this passage. Okay? Vatishka margalosav adaboker, and she lays at his feet until the morning. Vatakam b'terem yakir ish esra'eu. We're at verse 14, and she gets up before anyone recognizes their friend. V'yomer al yivada kiva isha goren. Let it not be known that a woman came into the threshing floor. Again, he was of course afraid of this, and therefore he says, "Don't go onto the threshing floor." Now, there is an inescapable pattern of intimacy, of intrigue when it comes to sexuality around the establishment of the monarchy in Judaism, right? We know that Rus is the great-grandmother of King David HaMelech, right? And we know even their great-grandparents, we know Boaz's great-great-great-grandfather was a man by the name of Yehuda and Tamar. And then we have this episode. And then you have David and Bathsheba, right? You have all these stories which all lead themselves, and really, if you look carefully, if anyone's ever learned the book of Melachim, okay, the book of Kings. What is the book of Melachim all about? Kings. Yeah, very good. That was good. Okay, so yeah, it's all about kings. And so the book begins with the establishment of Solomon, King Solomon. The Davidic line really gets established at that moment. Okay, in the beginning of the book, it's the establishment of Shlomo HaMelech, King Solomon, as the king. And it begins in the weirdest way possible. The weirdest way possible. It begins by telling us that David HaMelech is quite old. He's quite old, and he is freezing cold. He's freezing cold. Okay, I know in Shul, people are old. I don't know, people get freezing cold. I guess it's an age thing. I'm always hot. Okay, one day I'll get old. Okay, what's it called? The point is that, whatever, the point is they're freezing cold. So what does he do? They have this interesting idea. They find, the Torah tells us, again, Torah's not shy. They find him a beautiful young woman to take care of him. Okay? Now, so the Gemara fills in a couple of interesting lines that are between the lines over there. The Gemara tells us that this woman says to him, "Marry me." Like why? Like what? Like I'm your attendant to kind of warm him up. Like he'll see her or whatever. She says, "Why don't we get married?" And he says, "I'm not allowed to get married to you. Why? Because there's a rule in the Torah that kings are only allowed to have a certain amount of wives. Back in the day, polygamy, marrying more than one wife, was permitted, and you're allowed to have a certain amount. He already had the maximum amount of wives. Okay, so he says, "I can't marry you. Okay, so she says, I know what's going on over here. She says, "You're just old. You're impotent. You're not able to actually, be active, and therefore, that's why you don't want to marry me." And the Gemara tells us, Bathsheba, his main wife, comes over, and they're intimate, and basically proves to this woman that they're wrong. What in the world is this? Is like really not G-rate. Like, what's going on over here? This is the beginning of the book of Shlomo HaMelech. Like, it's such it's distasteful. I feel even weird saying these words. It's a Gemara, but it tells us like the whole episode of. Think about it. David HaMelech is basically saying, no, it's not because I'm impotent. It's because I'm making a choice. Okay, so. Why is this the beginning, the introduction to the Davidic line? Like, this is the story that tells us, when King David established a monarchy. What's going on? But some point out that what we do find from that story and this story is a person who is able to quiet their desires, quiet their urges, right? To be a king. What does it mean to be a king? The Torah is very clear about what it means to be a king, a Jewish king. It is not the greatest role, okay? Basically, all the laws of the Torah is what you cannot do. Right? It's basically, you cannot do this, you cannot do that, you cannot do this, you cannot do that. You are completely subservient to the people. You have no identity of your own. Actually, and we'll come back to this, the symbol in Judaism that symbolizes King David, anyone know what the symbol is? It's not the Star of David. No one really knows where that comes from. That's a whole big controversy. Where the Magen David, we don't have one in this room, but where the Magen David, we do there. Where the Magen David comes from, what is the symbol for King David? Sorry? Not the harp. Although in Ir David they do have a harp over there. There is a symbol. So there's something called Kiddush Levana, which is said when the new moon arises, and out on Saturday nights usually men will go outside and they'll say this short prayer, and they say in the middle of this prayer that discusses the renewal of the moon, David Melech Yisrael Chai V'Kayam. King David is the king of Israel. Like, what's going on over here? And the Kabbalistic literature. I'm sorry, today's class, this whole series is a little bit more esoteric, but points out that the symbol for a king in Judaism is a moon. Think about like the cultures that we were surrounded by. The Egyptians, what is the symbol of their king? It's the sun god, right? They are the sun, right? The sun is the power. The sun is the force. The moon has nothing of their own. right? It's all a reflection of everything else. Leisley, the Gemara, the Aramaic term that the Kabbalists use is that it has nothing, migarmei klum, it has nothing of its own. The idea of being a king is being able to quiet my own needs and listen to the needs of others, right? It's not a coincidence that Boaz over here restrains himself, that King David in that opening passage demonstrates his ability to restrain himself, because to be a real leader, it's not about asserting yourself. It's about not being weak. It's about being very strong and being able to quiet your needs for the needs of others. In this moment, Boaz delicately, he doesn't send her away. He says, stay, right? And at the same time, he holds himself back. That is a necessary ingredient for the establishment of a healthy leader. A healthy leader does not just use their own drives, not use their power. They understand their power, and they're able to restrain themselves despite that. Okay? Let's keep on reading. Okay? Okay. We're getting a little late on time, as always. So let's summarize a little bit. Basically, what happens next, I'm just going to summarize the next few verses. Nami goes back in the morning, and she tells her, Rus goes back in the morning, and she tells her mother-in-law, this is what happens. He said he's going to take care of it. And Nami says, don't worry, he'll take care of it immediately. I know him. He's going to take care of it immediately. Okay, that's the end of that chapter. And now there's the final chapter. Before we see the final chapter, let's go back to something we saw earlier. We saw a law. There are two nations that the Jewish people are not allowed to marry into, even if they convert. What are those two nations? Ammon and Moab. Okay, which nation is Ruth from? Moab. That's a problem, right? Even if she converts, which we assume that she did at some point along the way, you can't marry into someone from Moab. However, there was a tradition. There was a tradition that was passed on from Moshe to Moses to Joshua, et cetera, to the leaders of the Jewish people, that if by chance some woman were to come from Moab, it's Moavi velo Moaviyah. It is a male that you cannot marry. You're allowed to marry a female Moabite. Now, this never came up, because typically Moab was an enemy of the Jewish people. No, we never had a convert from the nation of Moab, but all of a sudden this woman comes and converted, right? And now the question is, and now she wants to get married. So who is the leader of the generation? Boaz. Okay? So Boaz is the leader of the generation. So imagine this scene, right? Boaz comes to the study hall, or comes to the judges in the morning and says, guys, I want to tell you something. I would like to marry Rus. I want to marry Ruth. And they say, Boaz, it says in the Torah, you can't marry a Moabite. He says, don't worry. I have a tradition, only the males, I'm allowed to marry the females. And what do? They laugh him out of the house, right? I mean, like, come on. What a coincidence. You're the guy who has the tradition that, that it's all wrong, that you are allowed to marry this woman. You're with me? It seems a little bit strange. He is about as partial as it gets over here. All with me, right? He's the only one who has this tradition that says that it's not a male. It's allowed to be, only males you can't marry. You're allowed to marry a Moabite woman. So how's he going to present that in a way that does not completely demonstrate that he is completely, a liar? How is he going to get above the suspicion that he's not making it up? Right? We have a term, nogea b'davar is the term. A person is biased, right? There's a bias. There's a tremendous bias. He wants to marry her, and he's the one who tells us that law. It's bizarre, right? So how's he get around it? You see the challenge, right? So let's see what Boaz does. Remember, what did Boaz tell Rus? He says, I'm not the first relative. There's a relative that's closer to Elimelech than I am. Okay? So let's keep that in mind, okay? So let's begin we're under G, source number 1. So it says Boaz al Ashar. Boaz goes up to the gate. Vayashav, the gate of the city, is where people gathered. Vayashav sham, and he stays there. And he sits there. V'hinei goel over ash diber Boaz, and the individual, the redeemer, the relative, which was closer to Boaz than closer to Elimelech, to Rus's family, to Nami's family, than Boaz. And he says, Vayomer suru shva po ploni almoni. Ploni almoni, come sit over here. Vayasar vayeshev, and he sits down. Now Ploni almoni. What Ploni Almoni is not a name. Ploni Almoni has become, if you're in Israel, we have a term when we want to use a name for someone, we say John Doe, right? In Hebrew, in Israel, the term that they use for John Doe is Ploni Almoni. It means no name, whatever. It's just like a random, but it doesn't really have a name. So interesting, we'll come back to that. Why is he called Ploni Almoni? Like such and such, so-so, Mr. X. But he doesn't have a name. We'll come back to that, okay? And Boaz takes 10 leaders, elders. He says, sit here, and they sit down. And he says to the relative, he says, listen, Elimelech has a field, right? Keep in mind, back in the day, everyone in Israel had an inheritance, right? There's a piece of land. There's a piece of land that belongs to each and every one of you in Israel right now. I don't know where it is. You don't know where it is. But there was a piece of land that was passed on from parent to child, and as times went on, people divided it between the siblings, whatever it was. But there was a piece of land. So Elimelech, again, Nami's husband, had a piece of land, right? And so this piece of land, it belongs to Elimelech, but he's no longer alive. And Machra Nami, Hashem Mistei Moav. And Nami, Elimelech's wife, wants to sell that land. Okay, so far so good. Vani Amarti, and Boaz says, I thought to myself, Egla Aznecha, okay, I will let this become known, Lamar, Knei Neged Yoshvim, V'neged Ziknei Ami, and, go acquire the field in front of, I want to let you know, let me take a step back. There's a principle in Jewish law that the closest relatives should acquire that land. Keep in mind, the lands were ancestral. They were ancestral. They were part of the family, right? So if you were part of the tribe of Dan, it would not be appropriate to sell your piece of land to the tribe of Zvulun, because then the tribe of Dan loses out. So what would happen is if you say put up a for sale sign, the people of your tribe and the people of your family would have a right of first refusal. They would have the right to come and try to buy that land because they want to keep the land with you. So Boaz says to this guy, Ploni Almoni, he says, listen, there's a piece of land that Nami wants to sell. Before she goes and sells it to anyone, we, the relatives, have the first bid. Do you want to get it? You could get it. It'll be yours. And the guy says, sure, I'd like to. Real estate's always a good investment. Doesn't matter what's going on in the world. It's always better than crypto, right? Go ahead. I'm going to go ahead and buy this land. Fantastic. And he says, oh, there's a catch. What's the catch? The catch is that when you buy the land, you have to marry the daughter-in-law. You have to marry Rus. Okay? He says, oh. So let's see what he says this, okay? Look at verse 6 in the bottom of the page. Vayomer Hagol, so before I see this verse, what did Boaz just do? So let's imagine we're in that courthouse now, okay? What happens? So they said, oh, you have to marry Rus. And people say, wait, Rus is from the tribe of Moab. So what does Boaz say? Boaz says, oh, yeah, it's from the tribe of Moab, but I have a tradition that a woman from Moab you're allowed to marry. Now, is he talking about himself right now? No, because it's about Ploni Almoni, this other dude, right? And it's about him. It's not about her, not about Boaz right now. It's about this other person. And so here he's impartial. Like he has nothing to do with this case. He's basically able to say it's not about me. It's about him. He's now established this law. He's said it about Ploni Almoni. Now he's able to pass on this tradition. But let's see how Ploni Almoni responds. Vayomer Hagoel, Ploni Almoni says, Lo ucha liga li, I can't redeem her. Why? Pen ashchis es nachalasi. It's going to harm my inheritance. Okay, it's going to harm me. Okay, so he says, therefore you go ahead and redeem it. What's he afraid of? What is this man afraid of? He's afraid that it looks bad. It looks bad. I don't want to marry this woman who's from this nation that we're not friends with. It's bad. It's going to be bad for shidduchim. It's not good for my family. It doesn't reflect well. People are going to look down on me. People are not going to respect me if I do this. And here's the great irony, right? What's he concerned about? He's concerned about his good name. He wants people to see him in a positive light. And for eternity, when we think of the anonymous individual, the person who has no name, it's this guy, Ploni Almoni. He's so concerned with having his own dignity, we say, we don't know who you are. Dignity? Who? What? We don't remember this person's name. That is the sweet irony of this, of the naming over here, Ploni Almoni, that he becomes the anonymous person. Bottom line is, he says, I don't want to marry her. You could. Okay? And therefore, what happens next, I'm going to summarize. Boaz goes ahead and purchases the land, and he says, I will marry Rus. Okay? Let's talk about what Yibum is. I know there's a lot of new concepts in today's class. I apologize. Bear with me. New topic next week, okay? So here we go. So what is Yibum? Again, let's just review what Yibum is. Yibum is when there are two brothers, we'll call them Ruvain and Shimon. Ruvain is married to Sarah, and Ruvain dies without any children. Sarah is now connected to Shimon. And Shimon and Sarah have a choice. Do they want to marry each other? That's called Yibum. Do they not want to marry each other? That's called Chalitza. If they do marry each other, the Torah says that the child gets the name of the brother. Now, that's never actually happened. They're not actually named after the deceased brother, but what it means, the word shame is also associated with neshama. And so many of the commentators say it gets the soul of the brother. That's almost like a way of ensuring continuity of the brother in this world. That's the idea behind Yibum. But let's think, so we know probably what's the first story. There's an early story of Yibum in the Torah with the children of Judah, of Yehuda, right? Their names are Er and Onan. Er marries Tamar, and Er dies, right? And then Yehuda says to Onan, you go marry Tamar. And what happens? He ensures that he never impregnates her. Why? And he says, I want my own son. I don't want a son that's going to be associated with my brother. I wanted my own children. I don't want to adopt. I want my own, right? And we can understand that's a normal, normal impulse to say, I want my own child. I want someone who's affiliated with me, right? Yibum is in many ways, so let's think about what that means. What that means is that Yibum is really an incredibly selfless act, right? That's why Onan was not willing to do so. Because basically what you're saying, when you get married, when this couple gets married, the child is not really seen as his child. It's seen as someone else's child. It's once again an act of negation. It's an act of negation. It's an act where someone says, I don't, that I'm able to negate my own needs. I'm able to negate my own desires for someone else, for someone outside of me, right? And Yibum is also, did we talk about Adam and Chava last week? I don't remember if we talked about Adam and Eve. Did we talk about Adam and Eve? No. Good memory. Okay. Okay, so we'll hold off on talking about it again. Okay, don't worry about it. Bottom line is what's happening over here. In this moment when they do Yibum, this is the most selfless act. It's an act where, and think about it, who makes the, how do I say this best? Who makes when normal people get married, how does it happen? They see each other at a bar, so they're introduced to one another, whatever, and they get married. They're making a choice. Yibum, who made the choice that these two people should get married? Sorry? The Torah, God, right? In other words, they didn't choose this. This is God imposing this on them, right? We've spoken about until now that when something gets imposed upon you, it diminishes you, right? Some suggest, this is a mention of Adam and Chava, Adam and Eve, that some suggest that one of the reasons that Adam rebelled against God was because he was resentful about the gift of Chava, of Eve. Don't give me a wife. I want to choose a wife, right? I want to choose a wife. He felt like stifled, right? When someone gives you stuff, you feel like, whoa. I want to make my own choices, right? That's what the Midrashim say, that he says, I don't want this, right? I want to make my own choices. Yibum is in many ways a reenactment of that. It's basically God is the Torah. God is telling you, this is who you have to marry, right? It could be something which is stifling, because to receive is to be stifled. But in this moment, we find two people who are able to, on the one hand, maintain their own dignity, at the same time, act selfless. And how does that take place? It takes place through, I'll use the term of mutuality, or a sense of respect, a sense of love that takes place in addition to the give and take. In other words, let me just spell this out a little bit more. The reason that that Rus is able to redeem the concept of chesed, of kindness, is what is being introduced over here by both Rus and Boaz, is that it's not a transaction, right? If I give to you, right? If I go ahead and give you something, and we don't really have a relationship, and there's not care, and there's not respect, then you feel small, right? When someone's, right, then you feel like the Yiddish word is nebuch. Nebuch is like, ugh, you feel like, it comes to the word ugh, no. But it means like, if you feel diminished, right? If you receive something that you don't want to receive, and someone's giving it to you, you need it, you feel diminished, right? But let's say you give something to someone that you really respect, that you really love. I'll give you a very powerful example. I can think of teachers that I've had where I bought them like a gift, a book, like a sefer, which I gave them. And then I'll see it on their bookshelf years later. I feel good. I spend money, I gave them something, right? And did anyone lose in that process? Did they feel diminished when did they feel diminished when I bought them that book? No, they didn't feel diminished. I didn't threaten them in doing so. It was coming from a place of love, and it was received with love. And therefore I didn't lose, and they didn't lose. Yes, it's true. I spent the $35, right? And they gained something of value of $35. But no one lost. We both gained, right? Until now, what the mistake that the moon made, the mistake that the people of Sodom made, the mistake that Lot made, the mistake that Moab made was the sense that there was a zero-sum world. That when I have something and I lose something, then I've lost something. And therefore, it diminishes you because now you have it, and therefore, there's a loss over here. But if there's a backdrop of a loving relationship, a relationship built on kavod, on respect, then when we give and we take, you don't feel a loss. You're able to, on the one hand, assert, and on the other hand, negate. You're able to give, and you're able to take. And if it's built around respect, self-respect, and respect of others, then that whole negation that takes place when you give, it disappears, right? If you've ever given or received a gift with someone that you truly love, and you feel loved by, you don't feel small. You feel good. It feels nice. It feels nice to get a present from someone you love. And it feels nice to give a present to someone you love, right? But the point is that only makes sense, it only takes place if there is if the foundation is that of respect. What Rus and Boaz, through their actions, were able to bring about, which is really the idealized version of Yibum, is the sense that, yes, sometimes things are forced upon us. Sometimes, it feels like we're stuck in a situation, right? But if the give and take is being done in a place of love and place of respect, then we're able to transcend that and not feel diminished. And what is the best example of that? What is the best example of people who are being told they have to do certain things? Who is a group of people that were told that may not make a choice, but were told you have to do the X, Y, Z? 613 mitzvos, that's right. The Jewish people were told, you must obey the Torah, right? And maybe our ancestors accepted it, but let me tell you something. I didn't wake up when I was born and say, I want to be Jewish, okay? I didn't say anything. They took me 8 days later and made me Jewish, whatever. I mean, for that bris or not, right? But they made choices for me, right? I'm stuck. Just like the Jewish people are stuck under the mountain, God compelled them, right? And we have a choice. We have a choice every day of our lives, right? To say, I'm going to feel resentful. And sometimes we do. We're like, there's too many laws. God, 613? And that's without the rabbinic laws. It's too much. It's too much. And we could feel very diminished. We could feel small because we're being told, we're being forced, like Adam was forced, like the Miyabim, like the two people in Yibum are being forced. Or we could recognize that within this limitation, there is room for a loving relationship. There is the room for what is called an Oved Hashem Me'ahava. A true servant of God is someone who serves God out of love. They're, on the one hand, they're servants. They have to do it, but we have a choice. We could choose to feel diminished and feel threatened and feel, pushed upon, or we could say, I make a choice that I recognize that God actually values me and I respect God, and therefore instead of feeling like I'm being small, my identity, my freedom is being taken away, I feel like this is a gift. Right? One of the reasons we read the book of Rus on Shavuos is because it gives us a model of what it means to be compelled, just like Yibum, what it means to be compelled, to be an Eved, to be a servant, and still do so me'ava. What is the name of their descendants, Boaz and Rus? The name is Oved, right? An Oved is Hashem me'ava. It's someone who serves God properly, serves God with love. That is one of the reasons we read this book on Shavuos. Yes?
That's what I was going to ask. What does this have to do with Shavuot, which is coming up this week?
That's right.
It's because of this story of Ruth and Naomi and Boaz. That's the reason we're celebrating Shavuot?
No. That's not the reason we celebrate Shavuot, because of the giving of the Torah, right? But this story is a great metaphor for how we should approach the giving, how we should approach our relationship with the laws of the Torah, right? In other words, Shavuos, there's nothing historically that happens with Rus and Boaz necessarily around Shavuos. But what we're describing over here is that it's an incredible metaphor for how we should think about our relationship with the Torah, which was something compelled. God compelled us, and yet we could choose to do it without feeling diminished, to actually feel bigger, to feel grander through the Torah itself.
If you were telling a child, why do you celebrate Shavuot, what would you say?
I'm a terrible teacher for children. I would say, I don't know, go speak. God gave us the Torah. God gave us the Torah. Yeah. That's right. That's right.
The reason we celebrate
That's right.
Shavuot.
That's right. Okay, yes.
So if Yibum was a divine commandment, how come it was abolished by Rabbi Gershom?
There was an abolishment because of the fact that it wasn't Rabbeinu Gershom wasn't. It comes before him. Really, the Gemara already talks about that. They kind of dissuaded people from doing so because, and this actually speaks a little bit to. I wasn't going to get into this. The Gemara understands that for a person to do Yibum properly, they have to do it with the mindset of doing this for the sake of the mitzvah, and no personal needs. Which is very hard to say that a person's going to go ahead and do so only for altruistic reasons. Very hard, and that was one of the reasons that they kind of discouraged it and eventually became like formalized. We don't encourage Yibum. Okay, I'm just going to read one more verse because really, at the end of the story, if you recall from last week, we spoke about the fact that Shmuel wrote 3 books: the book of Judges, the book of Shmuel, which talks about the beginning of the Davidic line, and this book, the book of Rus. And we suggested it's a bridge between the 2 books. How's it a bridge? The book of Shoftim is chaos. The book of Shoftim and Judges, no one gets along. There's civil wars. It's a mess. Israel is a mess. The Davidic line is our short period of time where things were good. Under King David, things were actually very, very good. He eliminated our enemies, or he quieted our enemies. He starts establishing things great, amazing, all good. Rus is the bridge between them. Remember, the story begins with Elimelech running away, being selfish, the people are immoral, etc., etc. But it brings us to this place where you're able to have unity, and you see that unity expressed so beautifully in such a subtle verse. If you look at verse, where is it? Verse 11. Look at verse 11 on the same page that we were. We're not going to read all the entire book. Vayomru kol ha'am. You see that verse 11 on the same page we were, on the page which has I and J? Verse 11. Vayomru kol ha'am asher bashar. So when the people saw that Boaz, it says he's going to marry Rus, what happens? The people on the gate say, Vazkenim, and the elders say, Eidim, we are witnesses, and listen to the blessing they give. Yitein Hashem as isha habal beisecha. May God make for the woman that's coming to your house, kirachel ukaleya. She should be like Rachel and like Leah, okay? Right? Asher banu shneim as Beis Yisrael, the two of them built the house of Israel. Now, what's very interesting is Rachel and Leah, right? Rachel and Leah. Those are the two main wives of Yaakov, right? These people living in this place, they live in a place called Beis Lechem. Which tribe are they part of? We saw this earlier. Trivia. It's the Davidic line. The Davidic line comes from the tribe of Judah, Yehuda, right? Who is Yehuda's mother? Rachel or Leah? Rachel or Leah? Leah, that's right. Leah is the mother of Yehuda, okay? Now, these people that are surrounding this whole thing, they're all celebrating, throwing roses and all that. At the end of the, there's the end scene to the, the end scene, and they're all from the tribe of Yehuda. And they say, God should make you like, you would imagine them saying, Leah and Rachel, Leah and Rachel, right? Now you would expect them to say that. But what do they say? They say, should be like Rachel and Leah. They're putting Rachel first. And they're acknowledging over here, as the Medrash Tanchuma tells us, that Rachel was really the main wife of Yaakov. And when do they do so? Specifically over here. Because what this story really symbolizes is that there's a change over here. Because Rachel and Leah, we know from day one, there was tension there between the two wives. There was significant tension between their sons, right? They ultimately sell off Yosef, right? They don't want it, right? They feel threatened by Rachel, especially because she was the main wife. So they feel threatened by their descendants. And always there's this tension between these two families, the family of Rachel and the family of Leah. Who's the more important one? Who's the more significant one? There's a lot of tension. And it's specifically at this moment where Boaz and Ruth demonstrate to everyone around them. It's not, their story is emblematic of a change, a transformation taking place in the Jewish people, where it's no longer, right, if you live in a zero-sum game, then there's a winner and there's a loser. There's a winner and there's a loser. There's nothing in between. But if you live in a world of a relationship, a world of respect, a world of love, then one person could one day be on top, another day someone else could be on top, one person could give, one person could take. It's okay. And so specifically at this moment, specifically here, the people of Yehuda are able to say, Kirachel ukaleya. They're able to put Rachel first because we're able to recognize, okay, Rachel has greater precedence. There's values in Rachel that we don't have. There's values in the descendants of Rachel that we don't have. That sense of competition, that zero-sum game that normally drives so much competition is able to be diminished, able to have a loving and mutual relationship. And that's what paves the way, this entire book paves the way for a monarchy. Because until you come to this point where they're able to respect one another, you cannot unite. The whole notion of a monarchy in Judaism was that King David was able to unite the entirety of the Jewish people. But until this book, until what Boaz and Ruth bring to the table, until they demonstrate that you could hold on to your identity, you could be a strong person and still negate yourself. You could make yourself vulnerable and you could make yourself vulnerable back. You could have a relationship of respect, and in that relationship there could be give and a take, and there's no jealousy. Only now the people are able to unite properly, and we're able to ultimately establish, the end of this book says, that their ultimate descendant was King David, David HaMelech, because this paves the way for the unity of the Jewish people as its greatest expression through David HaMelech. So again, let's just quickly summarize. The ideas that we saw in this book are as follows. And that is that chesed, to give, is not so simple. We say, so often I hear, I'm giving to people all the time. Like, I don't know why people don't like me or whatever it is. Yeah, because you're giving in a way that makes you, I'm the giver, they're the taker, right? And you basically are not respecting them. In a relationship of respect, you truly look in the eyes of the person you're giving to. If you truly see them and you truly have a respectful relationship, then giving and taking does not diminish anyone. Everybody gains. And that is the novelty that Rus and Boaz were able to bring to the table. Chesed does not have to be something which diminishes. And we believe, there's a midrashic teaching that says, in the times of Mashiach, the moon will shine as bright as the sun. Now, does that mean literally? It doesn't mean literally. What it means is that this notion of receiving, we live in a world where it's hard to receive. That's the natural, it's hard for us. It's a healthy thing that we have I don't like receiving, I want to be independent. And we have to work on this, like Rus did and Boaz did. But in the Messianic era, it's a time where it'll be natural for us to be giving and taking. We won't, because we'll naturally respect one another. That is our Messianic vision, but it's something we need to set the stage for right now. That's what Rus and Boaz did. That's what we're trying to, every Shavuos, we're trying to say, remind ourselves that yes, God gives us Torah. God forced us to take the Torah, but it's a choice to look at the Torah as either a set of rules or to see it as a relationship with God, right? It makes the world of a difference. If we see it as a set of rules, then basically it's a game of whack-a-mole. God's trying to hit us over the head and we're trying to run away. Kosher, not whatever, I'm trying to, make sure I don't get hit over the head. Or do I see it as a relationship? And then I'm looking for opportunities to connect to God. That is what Rus and Boaz is able to teach us, and that sets the stage for unity and the ultimate establishment of the Davidic line. I hope you all have a beautiful Yom Tov, a beautiful Shavuos, and next week we'll go back to the weekly Parsha. Have a great day.